In the gray dawn of November 18th, 1943, Captain Lieutenant Werner Hartmann stands on the conning tower of U-541, scanning the horizon through salt-crusted binoculars. The North Atlantic stretches endlessly before him, cold and hostile. Below deck, his crew of 48 men prepare for another day of hunting, checking torpedoes, studying recognition charts, brewing weak coffee that tastes of diesel and desperation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 300 miles to the southwest, a convoy of 37 merchant ships plows through heavy seas, carrying tanks, ammunition, aircraft, and food that will sustain the Allied advance into Europe. The ships move in tight formation, their hulls riding low with precious cargo. Somewhere among those vessels, hidden beneath canvas tarps in careful camouflage, are weapons that will rewrite the rules of naval warfare forever. Unknown to Hartmann and the 17 other U-boat commanders stalking these waters, the Americans have transformed their four-engine bombers into something unprecedented. What was designed to drop bombs from high altitude has been reimagined as a low-level maritime killer, bristling with additional weapons that turn the hunter into the hunted. In the next 72 hours, which should have been a routine convoy battle, will instead become a massacre that shatters German confidence in their submarine fleet and demonstrates that technological adaptation, not tradition, determines survival in modern war. 8 U-boats that sailed from Brest and Lorient with experienced crews will never return home, taking with them 400 irreplaceable submariners whose training consumed years the Kriegsmarine no longer possesses. This marks the turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic, the moment when German Naval Command realizes their wolves have become prey. It is October 1943, 6 weeks before the disaster that will unfold in the North Atlantic. In the offices of the United States Army Air Force's Anti-Submarine Command in New York City, a heated discussion unfolds between men who understand that the current approach to submarine warfare is failing catastrophically. Colonel Jack Roberts, a career officer who flew reconnaissance missions in the last war, spreads reconnaissance photographs across a scarred oak table. The images show U-boats surfaced in broad daylight, casually recharging batteries while their crews sunbathe on deck, confident that Allied aircraft pose minimal threat. This arrogance infuriates Roberts, but he knows it stems from hard reality. Standard bombing runs from altitude give U-boats plenty of time to crash dive. Even when bombs fall near a submerged submarine, the water disperses the blast. Direct hits are vanishingly rare. Major Thomas Kincaid, an engineer who designed aircraft modifications before the war, leans forward with barely contained excitement. He has spent 3 months developing something revolutionary, though many dismiss it as impractical. The B-17 Flying Fortress, that symbol of American air power designed for precision bombing of factories and rail yards, can be transformed into a submarine killer of unprecedented lethality. The modification requires installing additional forward-firing weapons that allow the aircraft to strafe targets while simultaneously dropping bombs and depth charges from minimal altitude. The concept violates orthodox military aviation doctrine. Heavy bombers are meant to operate at 20,000 feet, protected by altitude and formation flying. Taking a B-17 down to wave-top level seems suicidal, exposing the aircraft to every weapon a surfaced U-boat carries. The standard armament of 5 machine guns provides defensive fire, but offers little offensive capability against armored submarines designed to withstand depth-charge near misses. Kincaid's proposal changes everything. By installing 8 additional 50-caliber machine guns in the nose, concentrated in the bomber's nose, a tight pattern, the modified B-17 becomes capable of delivering devastating suppressive fire. While tracers and armor-piercing rounds shred the U-boat's conning tower, killing gun crews and preventing effective defensive fire, the bombardier releases depth charges with pinpoint accuracy from 300 feet.
The submarine, caught on the surface with its crew decimated and no time to dive, becomes a floating coffin.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Lieutenant Robert Hayes faces different challenges. Standard navigation over the Atlantic relies on dead reckoning between radio fixes, adequate for finding general areas, but insufficient for locating individual submarines in vast ocean expanses. The new tactics require precision coordination with surface vessels and patrol aircraft that spot U-boats but cannot effectively attack them. Hayes must guide Morrison to intercept points calculated from sighting reports that may be hours old, accounting for the submarine's probable course and speed, ocean currents, and weather conditions. A navigation error of 10 miles renders the entire mission useless. Training begins in early November under conditions of absolute secrecy. The modified B-17s fly practice runs against friendly submarines operating off Newfoundland, learning the precise timing required to suppress defensive fire while delivering depth charges. The Canadian submarine, HMCS Grilse, serves as the primary target, its crew enduring simulated attacks that come terrifyingly close to actual combat. On the third training mission, Morrison's aircraft drops practice charges that land within 20 feet of the submarine, close enough that the concussion damages external equipment and convinces the submarine commander that one more foot would have been fatal. The aircrews develop tactics through trial and error. Approaching from the submarine's stern quarter minimizes exposure to forward guns while maximizing time over target. Beginning the strafing run from 2 miles out gives gunners time to find their range and establish a rhythm. Concentrating fire on the conning tower, where officers direct operations and gun crews man defensive weapons, creates maximum disruption. Releasing depth charges in pairs increases the probability of a killing hit, as the submarine cannot maneuver away from both weapons simultaneously. Morrison slowly gains confidence in the modified aircraft, though he never loses his fear of low-level operations. During one training run, simulated anti-aircraft fire from Grilse demonstrates how vulnerable the B-17 remains despite its armor. Tracers pass within feet of the cockpit, reminding him that real combat will involve men desperately fighting for survival, not Canadian sailors firing blanks according to safety protocols. A single lucky shot into an engine or control surface could send his aircraft into the ocean with no chance of survival. The modified B-17s carry no life rafts suitable for Atlantic conditions. Ditching means death within minutes from hypothermia. His co-pilot, Captain Frank Delacroix, maintains an optimistic outlook that Morrison finds both admirable and naive. Delacroix believes the new tactics will revolutionize anti-submarine warfare, citing the successful suppression runs against Grilse as proof of concept. Morrison knows that a friendly submarine following scripted responses differs vastly from a combat veteran U-boat whose crew has survived 2 years of Atlantic warfare. Those men will not panic when tracers rake their deck. They will return fire with everything available while their commander crash dives, gambling that the submarine can reach safety before depth charges detonate. The political dimension complicates everything. Admiral Charles Harrison, commanding Allied naval forces in the Atlantic, views the modified B-17s as Army Air Force grandstanding, attempting to claim credit for what should remain a naval responsibility. The Navy operates its own anti-submarine aircraft, primarily PBY Catalinas and B-24 Liberators, and resents resources diverted to what Harrison calls an experimental toy. Intervention from Washington forces cooperation, and even then the information arrives late and incomplete. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the U-boat force prepares for another convoy battle with confidence born from 2 years of victories. Capitaine sur Sea Wilhelm Reinhardt, commanding the Mosel Wolfpack from headquarters in Lorient, studies the intelligence summaries with satisfaction. British convoy HX-217, designated target for his 17 submarines, carries war material valued at over $200 million. Tanks,
aircraft, ammunition, fuel, and food packed into merchant ships that lumber along at 9 knots, dependent on destroyer escorts that spread too thin to provide adequate protection. Reinhardt knows the Allied strategy. Convoys travel in tight formation, surrounded by a screen of destroyers and corvettes whose sonar and depth charges represent the primary anti-submarine threat. Aircraft provide additional protection during daylight hours, forcing U-boats to attack submerged at periscope depth rather than surfaced with superior speed and visibility. But the mid-Atlantic gap still exists, that stretch of ocean 600 miles wide where land-based aircraft cannot reach. In this killing zone, U-boats operate with relative freedom, especially at night when radar proves less effective and visual detection becomes impossible. The plan follows established doctrine. Forward scouts locate the convoy and report its position, course, and speed. The Wolfpack concentrates ahead of the convoy's track, forming a patrol line perpendicular to its course. When the convoy enters the patrol line, submarines attack simultaneously from multiple directions, overwhelming the escorts. Each U-boat captain selects individual targets, preferring tankers whose burning fuel illuminates the battlefield for subsequent attacks. The convoy scatters, escorts race to respond, and in the confusion, multiple torpedoes strike home. By dawn, the survivors limp away, leaving their dead behind in fuel-slicked waters. This strategy produced tremendous results throughout 1942 and early 1943. Individual Wolfpack operations sank 20, 30, even 40 ships from single convoys. The Allies replaced losses through massive shipbuilding programs, but replacement vessels required trained crews, and those could not be manufactured in shipyards. Every sunken merchant ship meant dead sailors whose experience vanished into the Atlantic depths. But by November 1943, the battle has shifted subtly against the U-boats. Improved radar allows escorts to detect surfaced U-boats in darkness. Escort carriers provide air cover in the mid-Atlantic gap. Most critically, ultra-decrypts of German naval communications allow Allied routing authorities to steer convoys away from known Wolfpack positions. Reinhardt knows his kill rates have declined, though he attributes this to increased escort strength rather than compromised communications. The possibility that the Allies read German naval codes remains unthinkable to most officers, though a few prescient analysts have raised concerns. Korvettenkapitän Ernst Bauer, commanding U-673, represents the new generation of U-boat officers. He received his command in August after the previous captain was killed when Allied aircraft surprised his submarine on the surface. Bauer took the lesson to heart. Surface only when absolutely necessary. Remain submerged during daylight hours. Trust nothing. His caution annoys Reinhardt, who prefers aggressive commanders willing to press attacks despite risks. But Bauer's submarine has survived 3 convoy battles without damage, an increasingly rare achievement as Allied capabilities improve. During the pre-operation briefing, Bauer raises concerns about air cover. Recent intelligence reports mention modified American bombers operating from Iceland, though details remain vague. Whatever changes the Americans implemented, they have resulted in several U-boats reporting near misses from aircraft attacking at unusually low altitude with unexpected firepower. Reinhardt dismisses these reports as exaggeration from overly cautious commanders who believe the tanker didn't die because it was impossible to kill.
Commanders seeking to excuse their failure to damage the convoy, aircraft remain a nuisance, not a serious threat. The priority is torpedoes on target, not hypothetical dangers from experimental weapons. U-541's Werner Hartmann shares Bauer's unease, though he keeps his concerns private. His boat carries a veteran crew that survived 21 patrols, an extraordinary record. His chief engineer, Oberleutnant Klaus Fischer, maintains the diesel engines and electric motors with obsessive care, understanding that mechanical reliability means the difference between returning home and dying at sea. His watch officers, Lieutenant Zersi Heinrich Weber and Lieutenant Zersi Otto Kraus, possess the experience and judgment that separate competent submariners from those who make fatal mistakes. But experience creates its own dangers. Hartmann has survived by being careful,
by trusting his instincts when something feels wrong, by refusing to follow aggressive tactics that leave submarines vulnerable. He watches younger commanders take risks that horrify him, diving late, remaining surfaced in contested waters, ignoring warning signs that experienced officers recognize instantly. Many of those aggressive commanders earned Knight's Crosses and promotions. Many also died, their submarines crushed by depth charges or blown apart by torpedoes from Allied submarines that now hunt the hunters. The final operational order arrives on November 15th. 17 U-boats will form patrol line Mosul, positioned across the projected track of convoy HX-217. The convoy, consisting of 37 merchant ships escorted by 6 destroyers and 12 corvettes, departed New York on November 12th and should enter the patrol line on November 18th. Each submarine receives specific patrol coordinates, maintaining stations 30 miles apart to create an interception front over 500 miles wide. When the convoy appears, the submarines will attack in coordinated waves, concentrating force to overwhelm the escorts. Hartmann reads the order in his tiny cabin, studying the charts and calculating probabilities. The convoy will travel approximately 240 miles per day, reaching the patrol line in the early morning of November 18th. Weather forecasts predict moderate seas and scattered clouds, conditions that favor submarines by providing concealment while allowing periscope observations. The moon will be in its first quarter, providing enough illumination for night surface attacks, but not so much that submarines become easily visible to aircraft. Everything seems routine, another convoy battle following established patterns. But Hartmann cannot shake the feeling that something has changed, that the Allies have adapted in ways German intelligence has not detected. He confides his concerns to Fischer during a quiet moment in the control room. The chief engineer, a practical man who trusts machines more than intuition, suggests that Hartmann's nerves reflect fatigue from too many patrols without adequate rest. Perhaps this will be the last mission before extended leave, time to recover from the psychological strain of submarine warfare. The U-boats sail from their French bases on November 16th, traveling on the surface at night to maximize speed and submerging during daylight hours to avoid aircraft. The passage through the Bay of Biscay proves uneventful, as Allied aircraft remain absent and surface patrols fail to detect the submarines. By November 17th, the Wolfpack reaches its assigned patrol positions, spread across the gray Atlantic like a net waiting for prey. On the evening of November 17th, U-489, a Type 14 supply submarine positioned at the eastern edge of the patrol line, radios contact with convoy HX-217. The milk coup, as supply submarines are called, exists to refuel and resupply combat submarines, extending their operational range. Oberleutnant Zersi Martin Schultz, commanding U-489, reports merchant ship smoke visible on the horizon, bearing 260, range approximately 40 miles. The convoy proceeds on course 085 at 9 knots, exactly matching the predicted track.
Reinhardt's headquarters immediately transmits the position to all patrol line submarines. The net has caught its prey. Now comes the killing. U-boats rush toward the contact position, their commanders calculating intercept courses that will place them ahead of the convoy. Hartmann pushes U-541 to 17 knots on the surface, racing through the darkness while lookouts scan for aircraft and enemy ships. The submarine's diesel engines roar, consuming fuel at prodigious rates, but speed matters more than economy now. Missing the initial attack opportunity means watching other submarines claim the glory and tonnage credits. Unknown to Hartmann and his fellow commanders, their radio transmissions had been intercepted and decoded. At the Allied Convoy Routing Center in Liverpool, analysts plot the U-boat positions with precision, tracking each submarine's movement from its signal intercepts. The information flows immediately to Admiral Harrison's headquarters, where staff officers realize that convoy HX-217 faces the largest concentration of U-boats assembled in months. 17 submarines attacking simultaneously could inflict catastrophic losses. Harrison makes his decision within minutes. Rather than route the convoy away from the threat, he will use it as bait to test Morrison's modified B-17s under combat conditions. The convoy will maintain course, drawing the submarines into attack positions where they must surface to achieve firing solutions.
When dawn breaks on November 18th, Morrison's squadron will launch from Iceland and Northern Ireland, arriving over the battle zone at first light, when U-boats typically remain on the surface after night attacks, recharging batteries and repositioning for subsequent attacks. The plan involves significant risk. Maintaining course means accepting that some merchant ships will be torpedoed during the night. Sailors will die in service of testing experimental weapons. Harrison wrestles with the ethical implications, but concludes that proving the modified B-17's effective will save more lives in the long term than preserving the convoy in the short term. If the new tactics work, U-boat operations will become prohibitively dangerous, forcing the Germans to withdraw their submarines from the Atlantic or accept unsustainable losses. Morrison receives the operational order at 2100 on November 17th. 8 modified B-17s will launch at 0430, arriving over the convoy at 0730 after a 3-hour flight. Intelligence indicates 17 U-boats in the area, though exact positions remain uncertain. The B-17s will patrol in pairs, covering sectors radiating from the convoy's position, searching for surfaced submarines that present visual or radar signatures. When contact occurs, the attacking aircraft will coordinate with nearby patrol planes to prevent the submarine from escaping. The briefing session in Iceland's operations room carries a tension that Morrison has not felt since his first combat mission over Germany. His crews understand they are attempting something unprecedented, flying heavy bombers in roles never intended by their designers. The risks extend beyond enemy action. Mechanical failures at low altitude over the Atlantic mean certain death. Navigation errors could place them hundreds of miles from the convoy, wasting fuel and leaving the submarines unmolested. Weather might ground them entirely, or worse, scatter the formation and leave individual aircraft vulnerable. Chen, Morrison's bombardier, asks the question everyone contemplates. What happens if a submarine fights back effectively? The B-17's armor provides protection against rifle-caliber weapons, but 20mm cannon can penetrate the aircraft's skin, destroying engines, rupturing fuel tanks, severing control cables. A determined gun crew might shoot down the attacker before succumbing to the B-17's superior firepower. The modified bombers carry no rescue equipment. Ditching means the crew has perhaps 3 minutes before hypothermia renders them unconscious, 5 minutes before death. Morrison provides the only answer available. They will do
their duty, trust their training, and hope their luck holds. The alternative, allowing U-boats to continue operating with impunity, means more merchant sailors drowning in burning oil, more supply ships settling beneath the waves, more delays to the eventual invasion that will end the war. Every submarine sunk represents 50 torpedoes that will never strike Allied ships, 50 attacks that will never kill Allied sailors. The crews disperse to their aircraft, conducting pre-flight inspections by flashlight, while ground crews top off fuel tanks and load depth charges. Morrison walks around his B-17, checking control surfaces and engine mounts, looking for hydraulic leaks or loose panels. Everything appears normal, but the aircraft feels different now, heavier somehow, burdened by the weight of additional guns and ammunition and the expectations of commanders who bet careers on this experiment succeeding. At 0430 on November 18th, 8 B-17s roar down the runway at Reykjavik, struggling into the pre-dawn sky with fuel tanks filled to maximum capacity and bomb bays laden with depth charges. The formation circles once over the field before turning southeast toward their target area, climbing to 10,000 feet for the transit flight. Morrison settles into the routine of long-range navigation, monitoring fuel consumption, checking engine temperatures, scanning the horizon for weather that might force them to abort. 300 miles ahead, convoy HX-217 burns. During the night, U-boats attacked in waves, exactly as Reinhardt planned. Torpedoes struck 8 merchant ships, sending 4 to the bottom immediately and leaving 4 more crippled and settling. The destroyer HMS Vanquisher depth-charged U-673, forcing Bauer to dive deep and evade, but the submarine survived with only minor damage. U-541 torpedoed a tanker that exploded in spectacular flames, illuminating the battlefield for other attackers. By dawn, the convoy has scattered across 20 miles of ocean, with escorts racing to protect damaged ships and hunt submarines. Hartmann brings U-541 to the surface at 0645, confident that Allied aircraft remain hours away. His lookouts scan the sky while the submarine's diesels roar to life, recharging depleted batteries. The tanker he torpedoed still burns 3 miles away, its crew abandoned in lifeboats. Other submarines are visible on the horizon, likewise surfaced and recharging. The night battle achieved impressive results, but ammunition expenditure was high and fuel reserves are diminishing. U-541 must return to the supply submarine for torpedoes and diesel before resuming attacks. The lookouts fail to spot Morrison's formation approaching from the north, flying at 10,000 feet above scattered clouds. Hayes navigates precisely, bringing them over the convoy at 0729, 1 minute ahead of schedule. Morrison drops down through the cloud layer, emerging at 3,000 feet to find the ocean below littered with ships, lifeboats, burning oil slicks, and surfaced U-boats casually recharging as if the war had paused for their convenience. What happens next will be studied in military academies for decades, analyzed from every perspective, reconstructed through survivor testimony and radio intercepts and gun camera footage. But for the men who lived through it, the events compress into a chaotic blur of violence where decisions made in seconds determine who survives and who dies. Morrison picks his target, U-541, the closest submarine and apparently unaware of danger approaching from above. He pushes the control yoke forward, diving toward the ocean at an angle that sets every instrument screaming warnings. The airspeed indicator climbs past maximum recommended velocity. The altimeter unwinds rapidly. Chen arms the depth charges and checks his release mechanism. The gunners chamber rounds in their weapons, fingers resting lightly on triggers, waiting for Morrison's command. Hartmann's lookout screams a warning when the B-17 is 2 miles out, dropping through 500 feet with its nose pointed directly at U-541. Hartmann immediately
orders crash dive, but he knows the submarine cannot reach safety in time. The gun crews race to man their weapons, swinging the 20mm cannon toward the approaching bomber. They open fire at 1 mile, tracers arcing toward the diving aircraft, and for a moment it seems they might succeed in driving it off or shooting it down. Then Morrison's gunners open fire with 850 caliber machine guns, concentrating 3,000 rounds per minute into a space 20 feet wide. The effect is devastating, far beyond what Hartmann imagined possible. Tracers and armor-piercing rounds shred the conning tower, killing the lookouts instantly, tearing through the gun crews, severing hydraulic lines, penetrating the pressure hull. The 20mm cannon falls silent, its crew dead or dying. Chen releases 2 depth charges from 300 feet, pulling the release just as Morrison roars over the submarine at 50 feet altitude, so low that spray from the submarine's wake wets the B-17's belly. Hartmann, standing in the conning tower hatch, sees death approaching in the form of 2 cylindrical objects tumbling through the air. He tries to shout a warning, but the words die as the depth charges strike the water 10 feet from U-541's starboard side. The explosions detonate at 15 feet depth, designed for shallow attacks against submarines attempting to crash dive. The twin blasts lift U-541 partially out of the water, cracking her pressure hull in 3 places and rupturing fuel tanks. Water floods through the breaches, overwhelming pumps and dragging the submarine down. Hartmann manages to close the conning tower hatch, but it makes no difference. U-541 plunges toward the ocean floor with her entire crew trapped inside, their screams audible to nearby submarines monitoring underwater sound equipment. The attack lasted 18 seconds, from first gunfire to sinking. Morrison's B-17 sustained 3 hits from the submarine's defensive fire, none serious enough to affect flight operations. He circles once, confirming the kill through the oil slick and debris field, then climbs back to altitude to search for additional targets. His crew remains silent, stunned by the violence and efficiency of what they just accomplished. 7 more B-17s fan out across the battle zone, each hunting surfaced submarines whose commanders suddenly realize their previous invulnerability has vanished. U-489, the supply submarine, becomes the second victim when Captain Delacroix's aircraft catches her fully surfaced with refueling hoses connected to U-217. Both submarines attempt to crash dive, but the hoses tangle, preventing U-489 from submerging. Delacroix's strafing run kills everyone on both conning towers, and his depth charges crack U-489's hull like an eggshell. U-217 manages to dive, but damaged and leaking, forced to abort its patrol and limp back to France. Ernst Bauer in U-673 witnesses U-541's destruction from 6 miles away. His immediate instinct proves correct. He crash dives without waiting to see the aircraft clearly, gambling that losing battery charge and position matters less than survival. His submarine reaches safety at 200 feet, just as another B-17 arrives overhead, searching for targets. The aircraft circles for 20 minutes, waiting for U-673 to resurface, but Bauer remains submerged, creeping away at 2 knots, praying his batteries last long enough to reach safety. Within 2 hours, 8 U-boats lie on the ocean floor. The modified B-17s devastate every submarine caught on the surface, their combined firepower and precision bombing proving impossible to counter. Several submarines attempt to fight back, but the concentrated machine gun fire from 8 weapons simply overwhelms defensive capabilities. Gun crews die before they can effectively engage the aircraft. Conning towers become charnel houses of shredded metal and torn bodies. The surviving submarines crash dive and scatter, abandoning the convoy battle entirely. Reinhardt attempts to regroup his forces, but his commanders unanimously report that surfacing has become suicidal. The modified American
Bombers patrol continuously, appearing within minutes whenever a submarine shows even its periscope. The Wolfpack tactics that depend on surface speed and multiple attack vectors have become impossible to execute. By 1100 on November 18th, the battle ends. Convoy HX-217 continues toward Britain, having lost 8 ships during the night torpedo attacks, but surviving intact despite facing 17 submarines. The U-boat force withdraws, having lost 8 submarines with all hands, 400 men dead, and achieving nothing to justify such losses. Several damaged submarines limp toward France, unlikely to reach port. Morrison lands in Iceland at 14:30, his fuel tanks nearly empty and his crew exhausted. The ground crews count 3 bullet holes in his aircraft, remarkably light damage for such aggressive combat. The gun camera footage, reviewed immediately by intelligence officers, provides clear evidence of the tactic's effectiveness. The film shows U-541's conning tower disintegrating under machine gun fire, the depth charges falling with perfect accuracy, the submarine's final plunge. Admiral Harrison flies to Iceland that evening to personally congratulate Morrison and his crews. The test has succeeded beyond expectations. Immediate orders go out to convert 40 additional B-17s to the new configuration, enough to maintain continuous patrols across the mid-Atlantic gap. The U-boat force, once masters of the Atlantic, now faces a weapon that turns their hunting ground into a killing field. But victory carries a bitter taste for Morrison. He thinks about the German sailors dying in their submarines, trapped in steel coffins sinking into eternal darkness. They were enemy combatants, deserving no mercy, yet their deaths disturb him in ways that bombing German cities from altitude never did. Watching U-541 sink, knowing that men were drowning inside, creates a moral weight that altitude and distance previously removed. War at 300 feet feels fundamentally different from war at 20,000 feet, more personal, more visceral, more haunting. Chen expresses similar thoughts during their evening debrief. He has killed men today with a precision and immediacy unprecedented in his combat experience. Previous missions involved dropping bombs on buildings and hoping they hit something valuable. Today, he released weapons that struck within feet of their target, killing specific individuals whose faces he saw through his bomb sight. The distinction troubles him, though he cannot articulate exactly why. The other crews share these feelings, speaking quietly among themselves about the strange intimacy of low-level combat. They have proven their tactics work, accomplished their mission beyond all expectations, and know they will fly similar missions tomorrow
and every day after until the war ends or they die. The knowledge sits heavily on them, success mingled with the recognition that they have become executioners, precise and efficient, and terribly effective. In the operations room at Lorient, the silence that greets the first loss reports feels heavier than the concrete bunker walls. Captain Sourcé Wilhelm Reinhardt stands before the plotting table, watching as staff officers mark the positions where 8 submarines simply vanished. No distress signals, no final transmissions, just sudden radio silence from half his wolf pack. The magnitude of the disaster takes hours to fully comprehend, as each missing U-boat represents not just tonnage and weaponry, but irreplaceable human expertise accumulated through years of training and combat. The survivors who managed to return to port tell consistent stories that military intelligence initially dismisses as collective hallucination born from combat stress. American bombers attacking at wave height with unprecedented firepower, machine guns that shred conning towers in seconds, depth charges delivered with impossible accuracy. Ernst Bauer's report from U-673 provides the most detailed account, and even he struggles to articulate what he witnessed. The B-17 that destroyed U-541 dove through defensive fire as if immune to damage,
unleashed a storm of tracers that turned the submarine's bridge into a slaughterhouse, then dropped weapons that detonated with surgical precision. Gross Admiral Karl Dantz, commander of the U-boat force, flies from Berlin to Lorient on November 21st to personally interview the surviving commanders. He arrives expecting to find demoralized men making excuses for operational failures. Instead, he encounters experienced officers, some with multiple successful patrols, unanimously describing tactics that fundamentally altered the strategic calculus of submarine warfare. If American aircraft can attack surfaced U-boats with such devastating effectiveness, then the Wolfpack doctrine that depends on surface speed and coordinated attacks becomes operationally impossible. Korvettenkapitan Hans-Joachim Müller, who commanded U-217 until damage forced its return, provides testimony that particularly disturbs Dönitz. Müller watched U-489 die while connected by refueling hoses, unable to disconnect in time, trapped by procedures that worked perfectly until they became death sentences. The American bomber appeared from nowhere, its approach masked by low clouds and the distraction of refueling operations. The strafing run killed everyone on both conning towers before defensive guns could bear. The depth charges struck with such accuracy that Müller initially believed they were guided weapons, though subsequent analysis confirms they were simple free-fall munitions delivered with extraordinary skill. The intelligence officers assigned to analyze the disaster spend weeks reconstructing events from survivor testimony, radio intercepts, and wreckage recovered by sympathetic Spanish fishing vessels operating in the area. Their report, classified top secret and distributed only to senior naval command, concludes that the Americans have successfully modified heavy bombers for low-level anti-submarine operations. The modifications apparently include additional forward-firing weapons, enhanced armor protection, and specialized training for crews in maritime attack tactics. The combination creates a weapons system against which surface submarines have no effective defense. The strategic implications cascade through German naval planning. Submarines must now remain submerged during all daylight hours, drastically reducing their operational effectiveness. Battery capacity limits submerged time to approximately 24 hours at patrol speed, after which the submarine must surface to recharge. This requirement creates predictable vulnerability windows that Allied aircraft can exploit. The supply submarines that enable extended patrols by providing fuel and torpedoes become floating death traps when surfaced. Without them, combat submarines must return to port more frequently, reducing time on station and decreasing overall pressure on Allied convoys. Dönitz considers various countermeasures, but each option presents insurmountable problems. Increasing anti-aircraft armament means additional weight that reduces submerged performance and requires crew members who would be more valuable as torpedo mechanics. Operating in groups for mutual defense concentrates submarines in ways that make them easier for Allied escorts to locate and attack. Abandoning the North Atlantic entirely cedes control of the supply routes that sustain Britain and enable the eventual invasion of Europe. Every alternative involves accepting reduced effectiveness or increased losses without guarantee of improved results. The commander who articulates the fundamental dilemma most clearly is Forgotten Kapitan Wolfgang Müller-Arneck, a staff officer responsible for tactical development. In a memorandum dated December 3, 1943, he writes with stark honesty that the U-boat force faces technological obsolescence. The submarines, designed for surface operations with diving capability for emergency evasion, confront an enemy that forces them to operate submerged continuously. This inversion of intended function degrades every performance metric.
Submarines move slowly, see poorly through periscopes, communicate with difficulty, and exhaust batteries that require surface time to recharge. The Americans have essentially transformed submarines into underwater targets rather than surface predators. The human cost becomes apparent as damaged submarines limp into French ports throughout late November and December. U-217 arrives on December 2nd with 13 dead from the strafing attack, including the executive officer and chief engineer. The survivors described watching their comrades literally torn apart by 50 caliber rounds that penetrated the conning tower as if it were constructed from cardboard. The ship's doctor, who attempted to treat the wounded while U-217 crash-dived, found himself working in a compartment slick with blood, trying to save men whose injuries exceeded anything his training covered. The psychological trauma extends beyond physical wounds. Submarine crews develop what medical officers call acute maritime anxiety, a condition manifesting as hypervigilance, insomnia, panic responses to aircraft engine sounds, and refusal to participate in surface operations. Several experienced commanders request transfer to shore duty, unable to overcome the fear that every time their submarine surfaces, American bombers are diving from the clouds above. The waiting becomes unbearable, knowing that death might arrive in 18 seconds from an aircraft they never detected until too late. Oberleutnant Klaus Fischer, Werner Hartmann's chief engineer who survived U-541 sinking through sheer luck, having been transferred to shore duty 2 days before the fatal patrol, provides testimony that haunts everyone who reads it. He describes the crew's mood before departure, the quiet confidence born from 21 successful patrols, the belief that experience and caution would see them through another convoy battle. Hartmann himself expressed no premonition of disaster, simply the normal pre-patrol tension that affected all commanders. The submarine departed in excellent mechanical condition with a veteran crew at peak efficiency. By every rational measure, U-541 should have survived. Instead, the entire crew died in an attack lasting less than half a minute. Fischer's testimony includes a detail that particularly disturbs German naval intelligence. Before U-541's final patrol, Hartmann mentioned increased American aircraft activity and expressed concern that Allied aviation capabilities were improving faster than German intelligence acknowledged. He recommended enhanced lookout procedures and stricter adherence to crash dive protocols. These precautions proved inadequate. The modified B-17 attacked with such speed and violence that even perfect execution of defensive procedures would not have saved the submarine. This reality forces German commanders to confront an uncomfortable truth. They are fighting a war where individual skill and courage no longer guarantee survival, where technology and tactics have advanced beyond the ability of traditional responses to counter. The modification program that Morrison commands expands rapidly after the November 18th success. By January 1944, 43 B-17s operate in the anti-submarine role, flying continuous patrols across the North Atlantic. The aircraft fly in rotating shifts, ensuring that at least 12 remain airborne at any given time during daylight hours. Submarines attempting to surface find themselves under attack within minutes, sometimes catching only a glimpse of approaching aircraft before tracers begin shredding their conning towers. The kill rate astonishes even optimistic projections. Between November 18, 1943 and March 31, 1944, modified B-17s sink 63 U-boats with the loss of only 7 aircraft. Morrison himself leads 34 missions before rotation back to the United States in March 1944. His final tally includes 11 confirmed submarine kills and participation in attacks that damaged 14 others seriously enough to force their withdrawal from operations. The Air Force promotes him to full colonel and assigns him to training duties, passing his accumulated expertise to new crews, preparing for anti-submarine operations. He never fully reconciles with the psychological burden of low-level combat, the memories of submarines sinking with all hands, the knowledge that his weapons killed hundreds of men who had no realistic chance to defend themselves.
During a training lecture at MacDill Field in Florida, Morrison speaks with unexpected candor about the emotional toll of submarine hunting. The student pilots expect tales of glory and triumph, the standard narrative of American air power dominating enemy forces. Instead, Morrison describes the moment U-541 sank, how the submarine plunged beneath the waves with such finality, how he circled overhead, watching oil and debris mark the grave of 48 men. He tells them that victory tastes of ashes when achieved through such one-sided slaughter, that the submarine crews died bravely but futilely, fighting against weapons and tactics for which they had no adequate response. The lecture creates controversy among training command officers who prefer their instructors maintain triumphalist narratives that motivate students rather than burdening them with moral complexity. Morrison receives official reprimand for statements deemed detrimental to morale, though the Air Force cannot ignore his combat record or the effectiveness of the tactics he helped develop. The reprimand becomes irrelevant in June 1944 when Morrison volunteers for B-29 operations in the Pacific, seeking some form of redemption through conventional bombing missions where altitude provides psychological distance from the killing. David Chen, Morrison's bombardier, follows a different path. He completes his tour and accepts promotion to major with assignment to the Pentagon, working in tactical development. There, he advocates for precision and weapons delivery, arguing that technology should aim toward minimizing casualties rather than maximizing them. His superiors find this perspective naive, pointing out that war's objective involves destroying the enemy's capacity to resist, not conducting philosophical debates about methods. Chen retires from the Air Force in 1946, his idealism ground down by bureaucratic realities and the inescapable recognition that modern warfare increasingly resembles industrial process rather than honorable combat. The British Royal Air Force implements similar B-17 modifications in early 1944, operating from bases in Northern Ireland and Scotland. Their experiences mirror the American results, with surfaced U-boats becoming easy prey for aircraft that attack with overwhelming firepower at altitudes that prevent effective defensive response. The combination of American and British patrols creates what German submariners call the Todesfalle, the death trap, a zone where surfacing means almost certain destruction. Kapitän Lieutenant Friedrich Weber, commanding U-953, provides the most detailed surviving account of an engagement with modified B-17s from the German perspective. On February 14, 1944, U-953 surfaced at dawn to recharge batteries after a night spent submerged. The lookouts maintained vigilant skywatch, scanning continuously for the aircraft that had become every submarine's nightmare. Weather conditions seemed favorable, with scattered clouds providing concealment and limiting visibility to approximately 5 miles. Weber calculated that his submarine could safely remain surfaced for 30 minutes, sufficient to restore battery charge to acceptable levels. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.